I warned you, asshole.
Sifu came out at the beginning of 2022 for PC and PlayStation and scored mostly 8s or 9s out of 10 from the big outlets. The biggest criticism from both positive and negative reviews was that it was just too damn hard. Almost a year on, and Slowclap, the game's developer, has been busy shipping regular updates. These have consisted of bug fixes, improvements, and a few content updates too. What I wanted to know more than anything else is how have these updates changed the experience, and is it any more forgiving? With the game releasing on the Switch in November, I thought now was a perfect time to revisit Sifu to find out. Before we get started, I think it's worthwhile prefacing this review with a bit of background info on my own personal preferences. Sifu is a very niche title, and the things that I love about it may actually be things that piss a lot of people off, so a little context I feel is necessary. Okay, so I'm a long-time fan of the beat-em-up genre. I've been playing these types of games since Double Dragon on the NES. That said, I'm very fussy when it comes to what I think makes a good one. The beat-em-up genre has been enjoying something of a second renaissance in the past few years. There have been revivals of old franchises, re-releases, new IPs, and everything in between. It's a great time to be a fan of the genre, although I haven't been blown away by everything that's come out. Some recent titles that have left me wanting are River City Girls and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I know, controversial. For me, a beat-em-up needs to deliver in 3 key areas. The most important of these is the combat. It needs to be easy to pick up, but also deep. By deep, I don't mean that it needs to have a long command list or complicated inputs to perform them, although that isn't necessarily a bad thing. What I mean is that it needs to be flexible and encourage experimentation. I don't want to have to lean on the same move or ability from start to finish, and I want to discover new things long after my first playthrough. The next key ingredient is the visuals, and more specifically the way characters are animated. Punches, kicks, and throws should all communicate the weight and power of each attack. Enemy strikes should also provide visual cues so that you can learn to react to them. The game needs to have personality and flair too. Everything should look slick in motion. The final component is the music. These games are generally fast-paced, and the soundtrack has an important job of getting your heart rate pumping and creating a vibe. On top of these 3 elements, I also prefer arcade-style beat-em-ups. I don't want lots of dialogue or lengthy cutscenes, I just want to jump into the action and play something that delivers immediately. Okay, so hopefully that sets the stage for how I feel about Sifu, so let's get into it. Firstly, what is Sifu about? The story isn't that involved, but I still don't want to give too much away, so I'm going to keep this description brief. You play as a nameless character who can be either male or female. After seeing your father murdered as a young child and miraculously cheating death yourself, you spend the rest of your childhood training to defeat the people responsible. It's a pretty typical kung fu revenge plot, which, while not terribly original, does make it feel like an old school kung fu movie. This is no accident either. The studio behind the game cited classic Jackie Chan movies as an influence, and if you're a fan of Hong Kong action films, there are heaps of little nods to the genre. Your journey starts at age 20, and every time you die, your age increases. How much you age depends on your death counter. This increases every time you die, but it can be rolled back by defeating specific enemies. The goal is to keep your death counter as low as possible, so that when you die, your age increases as slowly as possible. It's an interesting mechanic that replaces conventional continues with a system that rewards skillful play. So if you happen to die, you can minimize the impact it has by staying alive and defeating key enemies. Getting older changes a few key stats as well. On the positive side, you deal more damage. On the negative side, your health bar shrinks and some skills become unavailable to learn. It basically turns you into a glass cannon, but once you reach your 80s, it's game over. Sifu obviously isn't a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up. It's presented in 3D and you fight in 3D space. According to Wikipedia, it's classified as a beat-em-up roguelike, and I've also seen it referred to as a roguelite. I gotta say, I find these labels a bit confusing. They seem to get thrown around quite a lot in the gaming industry and applied to loads of completely different games. Sifu has some elements of a roguelike, it has persisting elements after death, it sort of has permadeath, and I suppose you could view the stages as dungeons. I'm not convinced roguelike or roguelite are good descriptions though. I honestly just think that people like to say roguelike. I'm getting off topic though. Sifu is unquestionably more of a beat 'em up than any other genre. There are many similarities with old school beat 'em ups. It's short, for example, with only 5 stages. It's possible to complete the whole thing in a couple of hours if you know what you're doing. Stages are mostly linear and filled with a variety of enemy types that show up repeatedly. There are weapons to pick up, there are mini-bosses, and each stage ends in a boss battle. Unlike a traditional beat 'em up, the skill required here as a baseline is significantly higher. This is not an easy game, and to finish it you'll need to commit to more than just button mashing. I'm not just saying that to be some kind of elitist douche either. On the default setting, beating the game with button mashing alone is impossible, and you should expect to have your ass handed to you in your first playthrough. This goes against my first beat 'em up requirement, but it's something that I actually really enjoy about Sifu. You see, I like fighting games, and one of the things I love most about them is how they demand that you learn their mechanics and systems. If you like to immerse yourself in the technical mastery of a game's combat, then this game will definitely scratch that itch. It's not just a game that's more enjoyable when you commit to learning it though, it's a requirement if you want to complete it. I said something similar about Ghost of Tsushima. I think that playing that game on hard gives you the best experience. Sifu is similar, except that here the difficulty is an intrinsic part of the gameplay loop, not simply the preferred way to experience it. I really have to stress how challenging this game is. Failing is a huge part of your journey, and replaying stages is something that you'll do a lot in the beginning as you familiarize yourself with the controls and the specific timing of combos, dodges, and parries. Those last 3 items is what makes it so tricky to master. In other beat 'em ups, and also fighting games, you can buffer moves and combos in. This essentially lets you preload them. As long as you input the correct button combination in the required time frame, the combo should come out. Sifu isn't like this. You need to match your input timing to what your character does on the screen to get the right combo. Take this basic 5-button combo for example. It looks like you should be able to simply mash out 4 light attacks and then a heavy attack, but you can't. You see, the second input is actually a 2-hit combination, and you can't hit light attack again until the animation is finished. Just about every command is like this. You need to learn its unique timing and what it looks like to execute it correctly. The same goes for defense. You can't just mash the parry button, you need to time it perfectly, otherwise you'll just block or get hit. Beyond this, figuring out what moves cancel into other moves is essential so that you can maximize your damage output. So there's a huge amount of discovery required outside of the command list. Learning this stuff takes time, and I think this will be beyond what most people are willing to commit to. If you just want to play something that looks flashy and doesn't require much effort, then you're not going to get that with Sifu. If you want to feel like a total badass, you're going to have to sink some serious time into learning it. Once you do get to a decent level of skill though, you'll have one of these moments.
I know Kung Fu.
And from this point onward, you'll begin finding a rhythm. And this is when the game starts looking really fucking cool and starts feeling immensely satisfying to play. Now, just like a fighting game, there's a training mode that gives you a bunch of options to help master each move in a variety of scenarios. This mode has been updated since launch with advanced options such as being able to fight multiple opponents. While it's not perfect, I'd like the tutorial to be a little more robust for example, it's still a very useful tool. Another change made since launch, and kind of a controversial one, is the addition of an easy mode. The game actually has 3 difficulty settings now, with Disciple, the original setting the game shipped with, being the middle option. Okay, so why is the easy mode controversial? The problem with this mode is that it fundamentally changes the game by removing the need to learn how to play it. You can now choose the student setting and breeze through the entire game and completely miss the point. You don't need to learn the moves or bother with the skill tree, you can just mash your way to victory. This is really disappointing. I feel like the developer has just caved into pressure from the casual audience that didn't want to play the game how it was intended to be played. Look, I'm all for letting people learn how to play and lowering the bar of entry, but I don't think removing skill entirely was the right choice. It essentially lets people rush through the game, which would be a short and shallow experience. I realise that I said it wasn't possible to mash your way through the game earlier, which technically isn't true. You can mash your way through it on easy, I just strongly recommend you don't do this. Long-time subscribers will know that I love a good food analogy, so here's another one to explain why you should avoid easy mode. Playing Sifu on easy would be like going to a Pakistani restaurant, and instead of trying something new, you choose the kids' meal, because a burger and fries is the safe option. Would you be full afterwards? Sure, but you wouldn't have had the proper Pakistani experience. Easy mode doesn't give you a true sense of what it's like to play Sifu in the same way that a cheeseburger doesn't give you the real taste of Pakistan. Now, a selection of gameplay modifiers has been added to the game post-launch. These allow you to make the game easier or harder. It's not a bad way to modify the game to your skill level, although they're classified as cheats, so none of your progress is saved while using them. I think allowing some of these modifiers to be used without it disabling progression would have been a better solution than what Easy Mode offers. So while we're on the topic of things that aren't so great, let's cover a few more issues I have with Sifu, because although it might be an excellent game, without shortcomings it is not. This has been raised by just about everybody, but I'm going to raise it here again because it's important. The camera sucks. Sometimes it's just way too close, and it can also get obscured when you're near a wall. Enemies, and specifically the bosses, will often force you up against walls, and it can be near impossible to tell what's going on when this happens. I also don't like how you need to spend experience points to unlock moves. There are plenty of new techniques to learn, but when you're just starting out you only have access to a handful. As you play you can choose which moves to unlock, although they're only available once you're alive. Once you hit the game over screen, all of your unlocks reset, unless you've spent enough XP to permanently unlock them. I get that drip feeding abilities is a useful tool to slowly onboard players, and it can prevent you from being an overpowered god right from the start. That said, you still need to learn how to use all of this stuff, which, as I've mentioned, takes time, and this will organically limit what's in your immediate arsenal. There are a couple of upgrades that can be quite useful, such as the one that instantly refills your focus bar after a perfect parry or dodge. None of the unlockables are instant win buttons though, so gatekeeping them behind progression feels unnecessary. I'm aware that this may not be an opinion shared by everyone, I just prefer to have everything available at the start and be free to experiment with whatever I like, rather than having to pick and choose and hope that I spent my XP wisely. The last thing, which is a little disappointing, is that it's only a single player game. A co-op mode, even something as basic as a 2-player survival mode, would have been incredible. According to the DLC roadmap, there is a new mode coming called Arenas that could be just that, although I think the likelihood of it being 2-player is slim. To be clear, I don't think the lack of multiplayer hurts the experience, like the game doesn't feel incomplete without it, it just would have been the icing on the cake.
You, stay there!
Stop him! For fuck's sake!
I want to quickly discuss the presentation because Sifu doesn't just play well. By now you've seen enough to know that Sifu is a heavily stylized game with lots of flair. It's not a technical showpiece by any stretch of the imagination, although it is a very pretty game through some excellent art direction and clever design. The fighting style is based on a real style called Pak Mei. Each attack has been motion captured to give the combat a beautiful fluidity and violence. Even when you're still figuring things out, the game looks incredible in motion. The music also really delivers. Each stage is uniquely themed and the music ties into each one perfectly, making them feel both distinct and part of a larger whole. It's a mixture of traditional Chinese instruments fused with modern electronic music such as dub and drum and bass. It does a great job of setting the tone and getting you fired up for the beatdown that's about to come. The UI is beautifully designed, and it even gives you a choice of dark and light theme, which was added into the game post-launch. The detective board is my only complaint with the menus. It's so busy and cumbersome to navigate that I found myself ignoring it for the most part. Performance is almost completely locked at 60 frames per second on PS5 and PC. The PS4 Pro and base PS4 do have some minor dips here and there, but nothing terrible. The original PS4 is the only platform that doesn't output a native 4K picture, it's capped at 1080p. PC can push beyond 4K and it supports higher frame rates too. It'll be interesting to see how it runs on the Switch. My guess is that it should be a fairly straightforward port, but I'm sure the Digital Foundry guys will put it through its paces before long. For an indie studio on only their second game, Sifu makes an incredibly confident statement from a presentation point of view. Sifu is an excellent game with a few minor issues that could probably be easily ironed out. None of them prevents it from being an incredibly deep and engrossing beat 'em up, so long as you're up for a challenge and putting the time in to get good. In terms of whether it's a better game now than at launch, I have mixed opinions. For the more casual player, I think it's actually a worse experience now. The easy mode does such a terrible job of teaching new players how the actual game works that anyone who tries it first will probably end up thinking the game is simple and boring. Those who do try the default difficulty afterwards will undoubtedly get a rude shock from the challenge it presents and how unprepared they are. So yeah, in this respect, things haven't improved. Sifu is not a game for those looking for something light to kill a few hours. It's a game that demands you learn it inside out and back to front. There are no half measures. You need to learn its mechanics, its moves, its bosses, its levels, all of it. And the only way to do this is to play the same 5 stages over and over again. If you're not up for that, then I guarantee you won't enjoy it. If you are, then it's one of the most satisfying games you'll play this year. I feel like I need to say something profound to end this review, so here goes. Sifu's title says it all. In order to understand and appreciate it, you must be tenacious, adaptable, and above all else, be willing to fail. Only then will it make sense, and only then will you become the